My name is Neil Polhemus. I'm actually in charge of development at Statpoint, development of all the Statgraphics products. What we're going to be talking about today in the first of a series of webinars I'll be doing this fall is a product called Statgraphics Stratus. Okay, Stratus is a new program that we introduced back in August at the joint statistical meetings that allow you to analyze data using just a web browser. Okay. There are actually three products now that bear the name Statgraphics. There's Statgraphics Centurion, which is our flagship product that runs on a Windows desktop. There's Statgraphics Sigma Express, which is an add-on for Microsoft Excel, which emphasizes the application of those techniques that are used in Six Sigma. But the product I want to talk about today is a product called Stratus. Stratus is a streamlined version of Centurion that we've developed for use in our web browsers. Okay. Now, Stratus, unlike Centurion, runs not only on PCs, but also on Macs, on iPads, even on an iPhone, although you don't have much real estate to see the output if you're looking on an iPhone. It's available over the internet at www.statpoint.net. Okay, you can go there after the webinar and give it a try. It can also be placed on a corporate server. One thing about running over the internet is that your data will be passed back and forth to the server. If you don't want that to happen, you can get a license to put Stratus on your own server behind a firewall, as long as you have a Windows server, and the Windows server has to be running ASP.NET. Unlike Statgraphics Centurion, where all the computation is done on your computer, in the case of Stratus, all the computation is done back on the server. Okay, now in just a moment, I'll be loading up Statgraphics Stratus. And what you'll see is that it looks quite similar initially to Statgraphics Centurion. Okay, there's a basic menu, which includes a home page, but then also tabs for file, edit, plot, describe, compare, relate, and so forth. And if you're familiar with Statgraphics Centurion, you'll see that that parallels the main menu in Centurion. In order to access Statgraphics Stratus, you first need to go to www.statpoint.net. Okay? You then create a username and password. You click on a link in an email that you'll get to approve the account, and then log into the program using your username. Okay. Usernames are very important in Stratus. They're used to identify data sets. Because there'll be typically lots of people using Stratus, we need a way to keep your data separate from other people's data, and we use the username to do that. We actually append the username to the front of your data files in order to keep yours separate from someone else's. There are 4 types of users in Stratus. There are guests. Those are people that don't have usernames. They can only analyze small data sets. There are registered users who can analyze up to 100 rows by 10 columns of data for free. And then there are subscribers who pay a monthly access fee to analyze larger data sets. We also have site licenses at various universities. They provide access for all individuals, faculty, staff, students, and it's a good way, of course, to allow people with both PCs and Macs and tablets and so forth to do some basic data analysis. Okay. There are a number of ways that data can get into Stratus. You can type it into our data editor. You can open up a sample data set, and we provide a lot of sample data sets, several dozen. You can open a data set from your computer. You can open a data set that you've previously saved out on the server. You can paste data from the clipboard into the data editor. And you can also query stock prices. We have a special link to Yahoo Finance for those folks who are interested in analyzing stock prices. Now, in order to demonstrate Stratus, I've decided to pull an interesting data set that was been around for actually probably 30 years, having to do with the Old Faithful geyser. Now, Old Faithful is a big tourist attraction out in Yellowstone National Park. It's a geyser that erupts approximately once every hour. It's very, well, faithful in that sense. They can sort of predict, as you'll see, when the next eruption is going to be. But it goes off, it erupts, as I said, just about once every hour. The data set I have on my computer in an Excel. The data set has information about 272 consecutive eruptions of the Old Faithful geyser. In column A in my Excel file, I have the duration in minutes of each eruption. And the eruptions range from about 1.5 minutes up to about 5.5. In the second column of the Excel file, column B, I then have the waiting time until the next eruption. So, for example, the first eruption in my file lasted 3.6 minutes. It was then 79 minutes until the next eruption. That eruption lasted 1.8 minutes, and then it was 54 minutes until the next eruption. It's a very interesting data set and is going to serve to illustrate how Stratus works. Okay. Now, at this point, I'm going to put away my PowerPoint file for a moment and load up Firefox. You can use Stratus with pretty much any browser, Internet Explorer, Firefox, Safari, Chrome, whatever browser you happen to have. I'm running Firefox here. And what you're seeing is the initial screen that's going to appear whenever I load up Stratus. It's got a main menu across the top, and you can see we've selected from Statgraphics Centurion the most commonly used procedures. It has a help feature where you can see the documentation for the program, and then it has right now a summary of any data that's been loaded, and right now no data have been loaded. Now, the first thing you'll typically do when you come into Stratus is you'll go up to the top and press the login button. The login button gives you a screen, on which you type your username. And the username I'll be using today is Stratus Support. You also type your password, and I'm not going to tell you what that is, and then press login. You notice there's also a register link here if you don't have a username, which is where you'd go to set one up. Okay, I can see that I'm logged in by looking at the upper right corner of the output where it says welcome Stratus support. Okay, now first thing I want to do is open up a data file that sits on my computer. To do that, I'll go to the File menu. It'll give me several choices. First off, I could, if I wanted, open one of our sample data sets. Otherwise, I can open a user data file, or I can query stock prices. The selection I want, because I want to pull an Excel file from my computer, is to open up a user data file. And if I push from client, it'll let me open one on the computer on which I'm running Stratus. Okay, so we're going to open up a user data set from the client. Now, first thing I need to do is browse to pick a file. And the file I want to open up is on my C drive under Data, Webinar, and it's an Excel file called Old Faithful. Here it is. Okay, it's actually called oldfaithful.xlsx. I need to tell it something about that file. In particular, I need to tell it what kind of header I have at the top of the file. And in this particular file, I've used the first two rows to hold the column names and the comments. If I'm opening a text file, I need to tell it the delimiter. That doesn't apply to Excel files. And then I need to tell it what decimal separator is being used, what date separator, and what format my dates are if the file happens to have dates. Okay. Once I get that set, I can push Open File, and it will read the Excel file into Stratus. Now, the first thing it'll do when you open up your Excel file is it will give you a summary of the data. And it shows, in this case, two columns. The first column is duration of the eruption of the geyser in minutes. There are 272 numeric values in the file, in that particular column, ranging from 1.6 minutes to 5.1 minutes. So you never know, if you're a tourist at Yellowstone, just how long that geyser is going to erupt for. It could be as short as 1.6 minutes or potentially as long as 5.1 minutes. Then the second column has the waiting time until the next eruption, and that ranges anywhere from 43 minutes up to 96 minutes. So that's basically a summary of the file. Now, if you want to see the data, you can actually push the button that says Display Data, and it will show you, in this case, the first 25 rows. You can see it matches the data that I showed you before in the Excel file, a column with duration, a column with waiting time. Now, once it's loaded, I could make changes to the data by pushing Edit Data. Edit Data brings up a spreadsheet type editor in which I can go to particular cells and, in this case, change values if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that, but you can actually type right into that particular cell, which is what you do, of course, if you were entering new data rather than reading an already existing file. Now, I can also, if I want, save the file that I've read, oldfaithful.xlsx. I can go ahead and save it on the server. Now, I can actually save it on the server with different names. Different types. I could save it as a Statgraphics file, an Excel file, a delimited file, and well, you can see the choice. I'm going to save it, and I think I'll give it the name Old Faithful Data. And let's just go ahead and save it as a Statgraphics file. When I push Save File, you'll note that the data have been saved. You'll also note that it appended my username Stratus support on the front of the file name that I gave it. So I've now saved that data out in a file called Stratus support _ Old Faithful Data. And when you go later to open up that file, it will only allow you to open files that are prefixed with your username. Okay, so let's go back to the home page here. And now it's time, since I've got some data, to show you the statistical capabilities of Stratus. Now, I thought I'd start by looking at the column called duration. Duration is the length of the eruptions, and there are 272 numeric values in the column called duration. If I go to describe numeric data, you'll see, as you would in Statgraphics Centurion, a selection called one variable analysis. Now, one variable analysis is a procedure that will take one column of numeric data and calculate various numerical statistics and create several types of graphs. When you pick a procedure from the Stratus menu, you'll initially go to a data input page. The data input page is where you tell it what column of data you want to analyze. In this case, I want to analyze the duration of the eruptions. There's also a select field where you can enter expressions as you would in Statgraphics to take just a subset of the data. For example, I could type first parens 100 close parens in the select field, and it would analyze just the first 100 rows in the file. I don't want to do that, but all of the things that you can enter in the Centurion select fields, you can also enter in the Stratus select fields. Now, there are other tabs on this page. This is the data input page. If I push the Analysis Options tab, it will show me certain options I have for this one variable analysis. Now, the only analysis options in this case have to do with how I tabulate the data when I do a frequency histogram. I can tell it how many classes I want in my histogram. I can tell it the lower limit of the first class and the upper limit of the last class, or I can leave the fields blank and it'll figure out good defaults. The third tab across the top here is Tables and Graphs. Now, Tables and Graphs list all of the output that I can create. It's similar to the panes in the Statgraphics Centurion window. But here, as we'll see in a moment, it's all going to come up in a single browser window. I have checked by default an analysis summary, summary statistics, box and whisker plot, and frequency histogram. Okay. There are other options, normal probability plots, stem and leaf displays, and so forth that I could select, but I'm going to keep it simple, and we'll just do some summary statistics, a box and whisker plot, and a frequency histogram. To the right of the selection, either the table or the graph, you have what in Statgraphics Centurion would be called pane options. These are options for the table or graph that you see in that particular row. In the case of summary statistics, for example, I pick the statistics I want to estimate. In the case of the box and whisker plot, I could decide whether it should be horizontal or vertical. All the selections of tables and graphs and the pane options have been consolidated here onto a single page. The fourth tab shows me output that I could save back to my data file once the procedure is run. I can save the summary statistics, for example, back to the data file. I could save percentiles, percentages, and so forth. This is often used in things like a regression analysis to save residuals, save predicted values, so you can use them in other procedures. I'm not going to save anything, but basically once I've made my selections and I then push the output button, it's going to go actually send the data to the server. I'm sorry, let me take that back. The data is already on the server. It's going to create a script telling the server what data it should read. In this case, Stratus support _ old faithful data.sgd. And the server will calculate whatever statistics and graphs you've requested. Now, one of the very interesting things about this particular data set, the eruption of the Old Faithful geyser, is that the distribution of the duration of the eruptions is quite bimodal. There are a lot of eruptions that last around 2 minutes. There are a lot of eruptions that last around 4 minutes. There are very few that last only 3 minutes. So it's very interesting distribution, very non-normal distribution, of course, but a very interesting data set to look at. Okay. Now, there's a typical histogram, right? And like all of the Statgraphics products, when graphs are created, they're created initially using various defaults. It's picked defaults for the titles. It's picked defaults for the number of bars in the histogram. It's picked the default scaling to use on the x-axis. Now, I can override any one of those things. For example, if I wanted to override the number of bars in the histogram, I'd go back to the top of the page, back to Analysis Options, and tell it what sort of tabulation I want to perform. For example, I might tell it I want 40 classes ranging from 1.5 to 5.5. If I go to Analysis Options, say that, and then click back on Output again, you will notice down here that it's now changed the scaling, and it's created 40 classes ranging from 1.5 to 5.5. So Analysis Options let me change how the data were tabulated. If I want to change the titles and the scaling, I need to go back to the top. In this case, press Tables and Graphs. Now, Tables and Graphs list the different calculations I can have performed, and underneath each graph is a button that says Titles and Scaling. Okay, this button here will let me change the titles and scaling for the histogram. And I think I'll start by changing the top title I'll change it to Old Faithful Geyser. Subtitle will be Eruptions. Along the x-axis, I think I'll have it say duration in minutes. And I think I'll also override the scale. I'll ask it to go from 1.5 minutes to 5.5 minutes in units of 0.5 minutes. I also have the option here of plotting it as a log scale or rotating the tick marks to be vertical. If I then push return and then go to output again, you'll now notice, there it is, that my new titles appear at the top of the graph, and the scaling now goes by half a minute instead of the default 1 minute. One other thing I might also like to change, and that is the color of the bars. Right now, the color of the bars looks to be lavender. To change that, I'll go to the very top of the page and push Preferences. This will take me to a screen where I set my preferences, and this is program-wide. So this applies to all graphs and tables. Here's where I set things such as the number of significant digits in the output, the default confidence level that's used to create confidence intervals and do p-values and things like that. What I want to do is I want to change, though, the fills. And actually, it's currently using a color called Thistle. All right, if you want to see the different colors that are available, there's a Backgrounds button down here, which will show me all the choices I have. Oh, I think one that's sort of nice is Spring Green. So I think I'll go back to the top and change from Thistle to Spring Green. If I now say Save, it'll recreate the graphs, and now instead of a lavender type background, it has a nice green background. So we have the ability to change pretty much every aspect of a graph. And incidentally, every time I made a change, you may have noticed that it went back to the server to recreate those particular tables and graphs. So there was a moment hesitation as it went back and redid the calculations. Now, if I like the output here, one thing I might want to do is save the script that actually generated this output. As I fill in the different fields, specify my data, specify the output that I want, and so forth, Stratus is actually creating a script, and I'll show you what the script looks like. It's creating a script that's sent to the server to do the calculations I desire. These are the same types of scripts that are used in Centurion. They begin with a tag labeling this, it's XML, labeling this XML file as a Statgraphics script. There are settings for the global variables, and you can see, for example, here's fill color 1, currently set to Spring Green. There's a data section that tells the script where to go get its data, which is currently the Stratus support Old Faithful data file. There are proc statements. Here is the procedure statement that generated that procedure. It's the one var procedure operating on duration. Here are the options I've specified for doing the histogram. And later on down, you'll see a request to do a box plot, you'll see a request to do a histogram. And under the histogram, you'll see all of the titles and scaling and so forth that I've asked it to do. Okay. Well, that's the script. If I want to save it, I can pick out a name like my old faithful script or something like that, and ask to save that on the server, which it just did. Okay. Now, the reason I might want to do this, by the way, is so I can tomorrow or the next day quickly rerun that analysis. And the way to rerun it would be to go to File, Execute Script. I then pick out my script. I think I called it my old faithful script, push Execute, and it will rerun that script. There is no such thing as a Statfolio in Stratus. The way you save in a set of instructions in order to recreate an analysis is to save them as scripts. Now, incidentally, you can take that script that I just saved, upload it to your computer, and run it in Statgraphics Centurion. Statgraphics Centurion and Statgraphics Stratus understand the same scripts. Okay, well, that's an illustration of a basic type of procedure in Stratus. All of the menu items, regressions, ANOVAs, and so forth, other than the statlets, run the way I just showed you. We've also, though, implemented in Stratus the statlets. Now, what are statlets? Well, let me bring PowerPoint back here for a moment and talk a little bit about statlets. Statlets were introduced in Statgraphics Centurion in version 17. They are basically interactive graphs that let you change options, query the data, move things around, and so forth interactively. In Stratus, statlets are implemented using HTML5 canvases. We actually create an HTML5 canvas within your browser window and then use JavaScript to let you interact with the graphs. It's very useful, as I'll show you in just a moment, if I want to rotate three-dimensional graphs or I want to visualize the effect of changing different options. Okay. The basic implementation is the same as it is in Centurion, but again, you're running under a browser instead of a desktop application. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and do a statlet. Let me show you how they work. If I go to statlets, one of the more interesting statlets is an interactive histogram. An interactive histogram will let me take a column of data such as duration and quickly create a plot. Now, unlike the other procedures like the one variable analysis, which did several tables and several graphs, statlets are just single graphs. Single graphs, though, that you can interact with. You'll notice on this particular output, the histogram that we saw before with a default number of classes. And the default number of classes, I believe, is 25. Along the right margin of the graph is a scroll bar. And right now, if I hold my mouse down, my left button down, and move my mouse up or down, I can interactively change the number of bars in the histogram. Okay. Sort of interesting to see what sort of detail you would get if you had lots and lots of bars, or a lack of detail if you had just a few bars. Another interesting option of the interactive histogram is the ability to add a density trace. Now, what a density trace will do is it will estimate, using a moving window moved along the x-axis, what the probability density function is for duration. It's called a non-parametric density estimator. Well, there's a particular parameter that one can vary when you do a density trace estimator, and that is, what is the width of the window? How big a window is moved along the x-axis in order to estimate the density. The important thing is I can change that width. And in the statlet, I can now do it with this bar on the right. Okay. If I reduce the size of the window too much, I get too much detail. If I make the window too large, I don't get enough detail. But I can interactively see, if I get down here at about 20% or so, that I get a pretty good description of the underlying density function. So you can see how the statlets are different than normal procedures. In normal procedures, you get lots of tables and graphs, but they're static. They're just displayed by the browser as images. In the case of the statlet, what you have is not a JPEG image. It's actually an interactive graph being drawn by JavaScript on an HTML5 canvas. So what's happening actually when I move this parameter up and down is it's running JavaScript within your browser to draw the picture and actually to calculate the density estimator. So before I said that all the computation in Stratus is done on the server. That's not quite true. In the case of statlets, we do some computation on the client within your browser. Okay. And I've tried this incidentally on an iPad, and it's got plenty of power to be able to do the calculations that are necessary here. Okay, so I've got a nice picture. Something else I can do once I have a nice picture like this, and this is true of regular procedures like one variable analysis, it's also true of statlets, is I can save them to the session log file. If I push output add to session log file, what it will do is it will go ahead and create a log file for my session. And it will put this image into the log file. I could then do other procedures, save those to the log file. Eventually, when I've done everything I wanted, I can go home, select File, Manage Files, and you'll see that there's an option to manage session log files. And you can see that I have a number of different log files saved. This one started at about 11/22 on September 30th. If I push display, it'll open in Firefox at least a separate window, and you can see the output of the statlet in this case. Now, incidentally, because we are running under a browser, if I wanted to print this out, all I have to do is use the capabilities of the browser to print it out. Okay, one advantage of running under a browser is we don't have to have our own print procedures. We'll use the browser print procedures in order to output things to your printer. Okay, so those are the interactive statlets. Now, there are a couple other procedures in Stratus that I wanted to show you before I open the floor for any questions. So far, we've actually looked at just one of the columns in this particular data file. Let's go back to home. The duration of the earthquakes, the duration of the eruptions in minutes. There's a second column in the file that's also quite interesting, and that is the waiting time until the next eruption. And as you'll see in just a moment, there's a relationship between those columns. There's a relationship between how long the geyser erupted for and how long it will be until the next eruption. Now, a good place to see the relationship is to go to statlets, histograms, bivariate histogram. Bivariate histogram lets you take two columns, such as duration and waiting time, and create a three-dimensional histogram. So I've selected duration and waiting time. I then pushed update plot, and it's now giving me a three-dimensional histogram. Now, what's very interesting about this particular data is in the space of duration and waiting time, again, the distribution is quite bimodal. Turns out that if the duration of the eruption of the geyser is relatively short, say around 2 minutes, you're only going to have to wait about 50 minutes until the next eruption. On the other hand, if you have observed a long eruption, something maybe around 5 minutes, it's likely to be 80 or 90 minutes until the next eruption. So in the space of these two variables, duration and waiting time, again, it's a clearly bimodal type distribution. Now, by the way, this is a statlet, so I should be able to interact with the graphs. If I push the left mouse button down and move my mouse around, you can see that I can actually rotate the graph. I'm just moving my mouse to the left and to the right to change the viewpoint and look at that file from different angles. Again, that's one of the advantages of running on an HTML5 canvas and using JavaScript to output the results, that you can interact with the graph within the browser without having to go back to the server, for example, to change the viewpoints. We're just interactively doing it on the canvas. Now that's an interesting illustration of that particular data set. Another interesting way to look at this data set, duration and waiting time, is to do a regression. In fact, if I go to statlets, regression analysis, you'll see that there's this curve fitting statlet. The curve fitting statlet will let me go ahead and fit a line or some other type of curve to this particular data. As in all regressions, I need to pick both a dependent variable and an independent variable. So I'm going to ask it in this case to please use for the dependent variable waiting time and as a predictor duration. If I then push update plot, it'll go ahead and fit a linear regression, and you'll see there's actually quite a strong relationship between waiting time and duration. If it's been a short duration eruption, you won't have to wait nearly as long as if the duration of the eruption was longer. Very strong relationship, an R-squared of about 81%. Now again, I ran a statlet, and because I ran a statlet, there are certain things I can do. For example, I can take my mouse and click on a particular point, okay, such as this point over here. It's telling me that this was row 149 in the file. That was actually, I think, the longest duration eruption. The X value was 5.1. The Y value was 96. The predicted value for Y was 88.2 approximately. It's also giving me upper and lower prediction limits for that particular row. So I can click on a particular point and it'll give me information about that particular point. If I go down along the x-axis, on the other hand, and click at a particular position, let's say around 2.6, it'll add a vertical line. I didn't get exactly 2.6. I got something close anyway. I got 2.59. If you don't click on a point, you click somewhere along the x-axis, it'll pick that particular value of x, tell you what the predicted value would be at that x, and then tell you what the upper and lower prediction limits would be. So there's a lot of interesting things one can do interactively with these different statlets. Okay, now one other thing I need to show you about Stratus is how we can use Statgraphics expressions. Up until now, I've just picked particular columns of my data file every time I had to input something into my data input pages. We can also, though, use Statgraphics expressions. For example, I'm going to go to plot, scatter plots, oops, missed it, XY plot. And I'm going to show you a very interesting plot. It's going to be a simple scatter plot. On the x-axis, I'm going to put duration. On the y-axis. On the x-axis, I want to put the duration of the previous eruption. Now, if you're familiar with Statgraphics Centurion, you know that there's an operator called lag that you can use to move the data back one period. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to put in this X field here the expression actually lag duration, 1. Now I can't put it right here. This just lets me select a column. There is, though, alongside to the right of every input field, an edit button. If you push the edit button, it will open up a new field where you can type what you want to enter. Any Statgraphics expression, same expressions that you'd use in Centurion. And I've now typed lag, open parentheses, duration, 1, close parentheses, which means duration lagged by 1 in time. And then if I push the arrow, it's going to put that expression I just typed into the X field. Okay, so there is a way in Stratus to use Statgraphics expressions. That's what all these little edit buttons are for. Now if I push output, you should see a pretty interesting plot. This plot has on the y-axis the duration of an eruption. On the x-axis, the duration of the previous eruption. Now, it's very interesting. There seem to be basically 4 clusters of points. There are long duration eruptions, which tend to be followed either by short eruptions or long eruptions. And then there are short eruptions, which are almost always followed by long eruptions. It's actually very rare to have 2 short eruptions in a row. Amazing what you can learn about data if you do the right plot. So in this particular procedure, this particular data set, there are definitely 4 clusters of points. Okay. Now, I'm going to take just a couple more minutes and show you a few other things in Stratus that I think are interesting. Let me go back home here. And now I'm going to say File New. If you say File New, it will unload whatever data you've been analyzing. Now, the reason I might want to unload the data is that there are built-in examples in Stratus for every one of these menu items. If I say File New, unload the data, and then go pick another procedure, such as an interactive map, the interactive map will automatically load a data set and run an analysis that's relevant for that procedure. Same thing with multiple regression or ANOVA or the control charts and so forth. If you don't have any data loaded, it figures you want to see an example, so it automatically loads an interesting data set and runs an interesting analysis. That might be an idea, now that I think about it, to put back in Statgraphics Centurion. If there were no data loaded, maybe it should load a sample data automatically like Stratus does. Anyway, what this particular procedure is, it's a map of the 50 states in the United States showing right now the average rainfall, yearly rainfall in each of the states. And it's color-coded with respect to 30 inches. The states are either blue or red. Those states colored red have more than 30 inches of rain a year. Those colored blue have less than 30 inches a year. Now again, this is a statlet, so I can make changes. If you want to see the wettest states are all down in the southeast part of the country. Oh, and Alaska over here. Okay. The driest states are out west. Montana, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. We call this brushing the map, and you can see some interesting relationships if you change the cutoff. Another interesting variable, incidentally, is also age. If I change from average rainfall to median age, it'll now color states based upon the median age of people that live in those states. It picked by default the cutoff of 33 years. There are 3 states in the union, Alaska, Utah, and Texas, where the average age is below 33. And a whole lot of states where the average age is above 33. If you want to find where the youngest people live, well, it's Utah, and the oldest people live in Maine, West Virginia, and Florida. A nice statlet. It's an interactive statlet. Another procedure I wanted to show you is the one for sample size determination. an important application of statistical programs, and we have the same thing in Centurion, is the ability to tell you before you've collected the data how much data you should collect. In this particular program, I have the ability to tell you how much data you need in order to estimate a normal mean, a normal standard deviation, a binomial or a Poisson parameter, differences between parameters, correlation coefficients, and certain capability indices. Now, as an example, let's suppose we wanted to analyze the capability index CPK. If you're not sure what CPK is, it's an index that tells me how well a process is able to meet a set of specification limits. Typically, people would like to see CPKs up around 1.33. So I'm going to type where it says null hypothesis 1.33. Now, I can either have it calculate sample size based upon a hypothesis test or based upon a confidence interval. I think for this particular example, it's probably best to use the confidence interval approach. I'm going to ask the program to tell me if I want to estimate CPK with 95% confidence, and I want the relative error, that's the width of the confidence interval for CPK, to be no more than 10%. How many samples should I take? Well, it came back and said if the index was thought to be around 1.33, you need 218 observations to estimate CPK to within 10%. So it's drawn down here, the confidence interval it would get if the estimate came out to be 1.33. This is 1.33 plus and minus 10%. At an alpha level of 5%, that's confidence interval of 95%, you need 218 observations. So we have some sample size procedures as well. We also have a number of interesting visualization procedures. Let me go and open up a sample data set. Now, as I said before, we have several dozen sample data sets that you can analyze or simply use to check out different procedures within Stratus. An interesting data set that I would like to open here is some demographic data from the OECD. It's a data set that has information about, I think it's 20 or so countries, all the countries that belong to the OECD. And it has things like government debt, unemployment rate, life expectancies, infant mortalities, and so forth, every year between 1980 and 2010. If I go to statlets, visualizers, you'll see that there are 4 visualizers, a one-dimensional visualizer, a two-dimensional, three-dimensional, and something we call the deviation dashboard. In the case of the one-dimensional visualizer, typically you'd pick a main variable, let's say infant mortality. I'm going to tell it that I want to slice that data by year, identify it by country. The color of the points, and you'll see that it actually creates a bubble chart. I'm going to select female life expectancy. For the size of the bubbles, I'm going to pick the female minus male. That's the number of years that females live on average minus the number of years that males live. I'm going to set the minimum bubble size to 3 and push update plot. Now what this is going to do is this is going to create a bubble chart, a dynamic bubble chart, as you'll see. You see each of the countries along the x-axis, and they each currently have a bubble. The location along the y-axis is the infant mortality. And you can see that except for Turkey and Mexico and potentially Portugal, the rest of the countries had infant mortalities less than 20 in 1980. Color of the bubble is female life expectancy. And life expectancies were in the 70s for females, with the exception, again, of perhaps Turkey and Mexico. Bubble size is the difference between males and females. Big difference in the United States, you'll notice. Females lived in 1980 quite a bit longer than males. Not much different between males and females in Turkey. If I now push the play button, it'll start changing the year. So what's going to happen is it will move the year from 1980 down to 2010. And it'll do it over and over again. And what you can see is that as time evolved, there were dramatic reductions in all of the countries. Turkey in particular made a very large move, certainly in the initial years. Portugal came back to end up quite similar to all the other countries. In 2010, well, Mexico and Turkey were still a little bit higher than the others. You can also notice that you're getting more oranges. Female life expectancy increased over time. And if you look at the size of the United States bubble, that bubble started fairly big, which indicated a large difference between females and males. But as time evolved, the difference between females and males has shrunk quite a bit between 1980 and 2010. Okay, so that's an interesting procedure. Last procedure I wanted to show you is one for analyzing stock prices. Let me go back and say File New again. We put into Stratus a procedure that will query stock prices. We thought that a big application of Statgraphics, because you're able to run it, for example, on an iPad, might be to analyze stock price data and make decisions about buying and selling stocks on the go. So we currently have a procedure on the File menu that will request information on particular stocks. First thing I need to do is type in a ticker symbol. So, for example, if I wanted to get information on Facebook, I can type in FB, and then I can request either daily, weekly, or monthly data starting at a particular date. And when I push Execute Query, it'll go out to Yahoo Finance, and the query returned 187 records. Okay, Yahoo Finance just sent me back the data. If I then go to statlets, time series data, stock price plots, okay, it will automatically do a plot of that particular data. There it is. It's actually plotted the data using what's called a candlestick plot. A candlestick plot shows the high and low values on any particular day. It's green if the stock price went up that day. It's red if the stock price went down that day. So over the last several days, you may notice the price of Facebook has come down fairly dramatically. The stock price plot also includes a moving average and by default, 2 sigma Bollinger Bands. One of the ways that folks try to detect turning points is by looking at these Bollinger Bands. So anyway, it's quite easy to query stock prices if you want to look at the behavior of certain stocks. Okay, well, that's what I wanted to show you today. I apologize for the beginning of the webinar, the problems we had with the audio. If you do want to see the webinar again, let me go to my final page here. Excuse me just a moment. We have recorded the webinar. And if I can find the final page of my PowerPoint presentation, you can see the recorded webinar again. You can also download my PowerPoint slides and the Old Faithful data if you go to www.statgraphics.com. When you go there, look for instructional videos, and that will take you to the recorded webinar. You can also try Stratus right now by going to www.statpoint.net. Stratus, by the way, is a constantly evolving product. Periodically, probably at least once a week, we put a new version of Stratus up at that particular website, adding new features and fixing any little problems that might occur under particular browsers. Okay, now I normally invite people at the beginning of the webinar to send me any questions that they might have about anything having to do, in this case, with Stratus. If you do have questions, you should be able to use the chat facility of GoToWebinar here to send me a question. Oh, okay. And oh, there were some questions. It's in a different spot than it usually is, but that's fine. I can see it here. Okay. Too bad I didn't look at that before. Some of you told me that you were not able to hear the audio. That was our fault. All right, okay, sound is back. Now let's see. I'm scrolling through all the nice messages that you sent us. Okay, first question, do you have a choice of language? Oh, that's one thing I didn't mention. Currently in Stratus, if you're doing some sort of an analysis, you know, let's say you've got that Old Faithful data, and you've done something like a one variable analysis on it. Okay, I'll just do a quick one variable analysis again on duration. You can go to preferences, and there is a setting for internationalization where you can tell it what output language you want to use. Okay, so right now I had it switch the output from English to French. Okay, so you can interactively tell it what output language you want to use. The basic interface, though, is currently only in English. Okay, so it's not going to change the buttons, the menus, and so forth. Hopefully we'll get to that at some point. But you can, right now, at least have the output come out in either English, French, German, Italian, or Spanish. Okay. Okay. Someone suggested that when we do the histogram, it would be good to color the tops of the bars one color and the other sides a natural color. You remember when we did a histogram here, a bivariate histogram? I put duration, I think, on one axis, waiting time on another, and used 3 different colors to show the 3 different sides. There's a suggestion that we use the same color for both of the sides and just use a different color for the top. The user is suggesting that this would help us determine whether or not we had any real zeros. I'll definitely give that some thought. Okay. Someone else asked, is there any difference between Minitab and Statgraphics? Well, I would certainly claim that there are huge differences between Minitab and Statgraphics. Certainly, you don't see anything like these statlets in Minitab. Also, the ability of Statgraphics to run under a web browser, Statgraphics Stratus, is definitely something that's not going to happen with Minitab. And I would also argue that our output is considerably nicer than anything you'll see from Minitab. Our output is in real tables. It's not just unformatted text. We can change languages on the fly. We can edit graphics and do lots and lots of interactive things with graphics that you can't do with Minitab. So yes, there are major advantages of that. Okay. Also, we have very, very attractive licensing options. We have academic site licenses, which are very, very inexpensive, that give everyone at an academic institution, everyone, faculty, staff, and students, a license to use the program. We also have enterprise licenses for corporations, which allow the corporation to put the program on everyone's machine. You'll find out if you investigate that our license fees are, we not only competitive with programs like Minitab, but considerably less than you probably pay. Okay. Okay, someone said the sound was fading in and out. Well, if that's happening, I apologize for that. Okay, that seems to have been the last question I was sent, and I've gone on just about my hour and a half. I do invite you all to go to www.statpoint.net and give Stratus a try. Okay, now we'll be doing another webinar in about 30 days' time. If you're on our mailing list, you'll be notified of that. Otherwise, thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you give Stratus a try. Thank you.